Welcome back to 7th Grade Mustache. On today's episode, we'll be speaking about TIKKUN OLAM, which is Hebrew, and it means to repair the world. Now, let's begin with the Torah. In the Torah, there are several mentions of the Hebrew exodus from Egypt, and it says that when the slaves are set free, they do not go away empty-handed. While these verses are open to different interpretations, the Israelites left Egypt with compensation for their servitude. Rabbi Sharon Bruce, the senior rabbi of the Icahar congregation in Los Angeles, wrote an article for the LA Times. And in that article, it said the structure of our country was built on the foundation of a stolen beam. Germany started making reparation payments to Holocaust survivors back in the 1950s and continues making payments today. Some 400,000 Jews who survived the Nazis were still alive in 2019. That year, Germany paid $564 million to the Claims Conference, which handles the payments. As of 2019, approximately 25,000 Holocaust survivors worldwide still received a monthly pension for damage to health. So, an additional 1,700 survivors who were children during the Holocaust and had previously received one-time payments will now be eligible for supplemental hardship payments of €1,200, which is roughly $1,200 US, in 2021 and 2022.
See, people think those Jews were simply paid because of the Holocaust. Many of them was paid because of what reason, Mr. Roscoe?
Stolen gold?
No. During the Holocaust, certain companies used slave labor. They were compensated for their slave labor. They were not just compensated for the fact that the Holocaust happened. I'm sure that Germany did, but there are several companies that had to pay restitution for using slaves during the Holocaust. One such company you might have heard of, I believe, was Daimler-Benz. Are you familiar with them?
Yeah, they make Mercedes-Benzes.
That is correct. Many of these companies use slave labor, and they were forced to pay restitution. There's like a whole list of these companies, and some of these companies were forced out of business, but these other companies, what they did was they set up different scholarships and different funds. And these Holocaust, not just Holocaust survivors, but these slavery survivors were allowed to get money and go to college free. And it was like a list of please forgive me, I don't want to exaggerate, 75 companies. But like I said, but there's also a list of companies that were forced out of business because they couldn't afford to pay as much as these other companies did. Restitution for slavery is not uncommon. And what my brother is telling you, it goes all the way back to biblical times. So look into it. Just look it up.
Okay. And so now let's discuss the Native Americans. Native Americans have long been denied reparations from the United States due to issues such as Japanese American internment, native land seizures, massacres, and police brutality. In a lawsuit filed in 1996, the U.S. government could not produce an adequate accounting of the $150 billion allegedly owed to Native Americans and eventually settled Cobell versus Salazar in 2009 with an undisclosed settlement amount. For many Native Americans, the land, including the air, water, and biological life on which many depend, is a natural relative, not a natural resource. And their justice traditions require the restoration of their land relationship, not monetary reparations. So, a Harvard University study released January 5th, 2005, concluded that socioeconomic conditions have greatly improved on Indian reservations during the last decade, due mostly to Native American casinos. The study illustrates that reservations with casinos had better economic and social conditions than those reservations without casinos. When studying the effects of casinos after 4 years of operation, you find that positive changes include young adults moving back to the reservations, fueling an 11.5% population increase, adult employment increasing by 26%, and a 14% decline in the number of working poor. In counties with or near a casino, the employment to population ratio has increased and mortality has declined. So, that right there lets you know that once you gave the Indians some money, well, they found a way to make more money and improve their quality of life.
That's so important.
They went from being dependent on the United States government to being independent.
Yes.
Because they could provide for themselves. So this is a culture that relied on the natural livestock in the land that they were living on. And so then that was taken away. And then they were, put into these schools, which were essentially concentration camps, to brainwash the Indian out of them, the Indian ways out of them. And then they were given alcohol, which people found out was horrible for their genetic makeup and killed off a lot of them. But then finally, they were awarded reparations. And around the time you saw these reparations being dispersed, you saw a lot of Native American casinos, because you didn't see any Indian casinos in the 80s. It wasn't until the early 90s they started popping up.
They started in the 90s. But, okay, the Indian thing is so complicated because many of us are Native, but we're told that we're African American. Remember, the white folks enslaved the people that were indigenous most places they went. The only reason they brought black folks over because they were killing off the natives. But one of the things that me and you had talked about off the air was I keep hearing these old black folks talk about certain things, why they didn't go by Native American. They started going by black. It's not for the reason you think. Many people who are Native American were not allowed to vote because they were wards of the state. And even though the land belonged to them, they were like they had some kind of weird custodial rights. So they weren't given the right to vote. But when black folks started saying that they were black and not Native American, they gave them the right to vote. People don't realize that shit is crazy. Mexican dude broke some shit down that it'll blow your mind. He said the reason that we were forced to lose our language is not not just because of this white supremacy stuff and these Europeans coming over. He said, no, many of the languages that were native to North America and South America were Shemitic and Hamitic. They were Hebrew languages. So if they had continued speaking Hebrew, it would show that they had ties to all kinds of crazy stuff. It would have proved who they were. And so it was very necessary to force these natives not to speak their native tongue. Those schools that you talk about were, like I said, I met somebody. So you think that shit's in the past. I met somebody at the time. I think she might have been a few years older than me. It was my homegirl's mom or my wife's coworker. She was not 60. So you think these schools are some shit from super, super past. Those Native American schools, that's some recent history. Just like when you talk about some of the slave history, that's recent history. That's not ancient history like they try to portray.
But when you consider how these Indians were treated in these government schools, it's horrible, man. They cut their hair. First of all, they cut their hair, which is a crime against them culturally. And then, they beat them. They did all types of shit. Well, basically what it was run by nuns and priests, which means these kids were molested also. But you had this Roman Catholic, ballistic, behavior where, I'm going to oppress you and I'm going to oppress you and I'm going to oppress you and I'm going to make you feel like shit. And I want you to understand that I'm at the top of the pyramid and you're at the bottom shoveling shit. That's the way these kids were taught and they were treated in these schools.
It's indoctrination. It's like I said, when you start watching these videos or finding these old articles where you had, it was it's not Hatunokchit, whichever tribes, one of these Eastern Seaboard tribes. And if you were over the age of 13, you were not allowed to speak their language. You could speak it as a child, but if you're over 13, you could be killed for speaking your native tongue. Why would you be killed? Yeah, it's way more to that. It's some sick stuff. And I think that when these stories are being told, that we don't get it. When they talk about the first Thanksgiving, when they really talk about what was happening, and that the Catholic Church said that you're allowed to enslave these people. Yeah, they were sanctioned. Is that the word? They were sanctioned by the Catholic Church, and they were allowed to enslave whoever was here. That's some fucked up shit.
In the 20th century, the United States issued reparations for Japanese American internment, native land seizures, massacres, and police brutality. John Tateshi was incarcerated at the Manzanar internment camp in California from ages 3 until 6. After the war ended, Takeshi and his family returned to Los Angeles, where Takeshi says they tried their best to assimilate. Decades later, in 1975, he and his wife, Carol, became the founding members of the local Japanese American Citizens League, JACL. As the Civil Rights Organization's National Redress Director, Takeshi helped lead the eventually successful fight for reparations. But the fight came with significant resistance, not just from the American public at large, but from the Japanese American community itself. As Takeshi writes in his new book, Redress, the inside story of the successful campaign for Japanese American reparations. The conflict most often occurred between generations. The Nisei generation, who were born between 1910 and 1930 to immigrant parents, and the Sansei generation, who were either incarcerated at a very young age or born after the war. To process the trauma of the camps, Takeshi writes, the Nisei generation embraced traditional values that encouraged them to put the past behind them. For example, gaman means to endure or persevere with dignity, and shikataganai translates to it can't be undone or it can't be helped. Their careers and businesses were most upended by internment. Takeshi says, but they weren't, Takeshi says they were not interested in focusing on JACL's efforts on the government handout or reparations. Their children, Sansei generation, grew up in the shadow of the civil rights movement. They came to see the internment camps as another form of racial oppression that needed to be spoken out against. By 1978, the JACL's redress campaign was officially launched, even as intergenerational disputes persisted. Ultimately, the JACL and the Japanese American community as a whole came together over a collective obligation to uphold American ideals. Finally, in 1998, after a decade of campaigning and over 40 years after internment camps closed, President Ronald Reagan signed the Civil Liberties Act, which offered a formal apology and paid $20,000 to each survivor.
Hey, let me tell you something about white people. So, we talked about this in past podcasts. In fact, we talked about 3 podcasts ago when I brought up the fact that the Southern Pacific and some of these railroads, many of the railroads use slave, Chinese labor in the West and straight up black slavery in the South. And there was a campaign during, Jesse Jackson was in Chicago, where they tried to sue one of these old railroads, one of these like C&W. It's not MOPAC. It's not the Missouri Pacific. It's not the Southern Pacific. I think it was CN, one of these railroads, and for using slave labor. These people were descended from slaves of these railroad people that were slaves, and so they go to Supreme Court of Illinois, and they say no, that you weren't affected by it. You're too many generations. Now, I have a problem with that, but there's something else I need people to understand. So when they sit here and tell you that we don't know we don't have records of who's who or who's a slave or who was brought over, you see these records. Right? White folks keep the best records. And I'm gonna tell you something. If you ever raise dogs, these white folks have dog records pedigree records going back almost 100 years. The first 2 sporting events in America were the Kentucky Derby and Westminster Second. So they literally have records of dogs and horses going back over 100 years. So you mean to tell me they can't keep track of slaves? No. You mean to tell me they can't keep track of who was born over here and who wasn't? Or they don't know what Native American tribe you belong to or what tribe from Africa?
Hold your fire. War reparations. In a war, there are reparations. It is essentially making one party pay, and it's a common practice with a long history. Rome imposed large indemnities on Carthage after the First and Second Punic Wars. Some war reparation induced changes in monetary policy. For example, the French payment following the Franco-Prussian War played a major role in Germany's decision to adopt the gold standard. The 230 million silver taels in reparations imposed on defeated China after the First Sino-Japanese War led Japan to similar decisions. But understand that Japan pays reparations to South Korea.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it was up to 2019, they had paid up to $500 million in reparations. And Japan felt like they had paid enough. The Supreme Court judge in Korea ruled that Japan had to pay some more money.
See, but a prime example of that in modern era is Japan and us. You know, when Japan surrendered, we started taking care of them. We industrialized them. We put money to get them back on their feet. But on the flip side, you have Haiti having to pay. Please, I don't want to lie. How many billions of dollars did they pay France?
But check this out, man. I spend a lot of time in an area that has a huge Korean population, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I see a lot of Korean people driving around in luxury vehicles.
Yep.
And I'm like, man, these cats got some bread.
Yeah,
these people
they
got this money. They got these businesses.
They on point.
Yeah, they got a fast track when they come to America. So I'm like, oh, after the Korean War, all these military bases had popped up there, and there were agreements that were made between the South Korean government and the United States. And they fast-tracked citizenship for Korean nationals to come to America. I saw this firsthand as a little boy in the 1980s on military bases, seeing all these Korean kids, you know, on military base. And I'm like, my father broke it down for me. And so I began to understand that these people that went to war with America were then given a fair shake and a level playing field for buying a home, opening a bank account, buying a home, starting a business, and getting a piece of the American pie. And this is something that anybody who paid attention saw. I'm talking about from Willie the Wino to Crackhead Craig in the hood would see this. And I'm like, these dudes just come over here and they get these loans for these businesses, these small business loans, so easy. Let me tell you something. I was working really hard to get a small business loan in the 90s. Okay? When I graduated high school, I wanted to start my own business. And I was trying to get a SBA loan. Yo, at that time, it was incredibly hard to get a SBA loan as a black person. You had to get over huge financial hurdles. It seemed as if these were impossible odds, as if the cards were stacked against you. And I'm like, okay. All right, they stacking the deck against you because they don't want you to fucking succeed. This is another form of redlining.
Look, that's the small business administration loan you talk about. I told you my experience on a couple podcasts. So I was trying to start my business, and I went to him, and my homeboy went to him, wouldn't give him nothing. But his girl, they gave her $50,000. Now, there's a reason for that. So when you talk to them, you know, they're there to help minorities, but there's only certain minorities that are in style. So
black women,
and military, former military, or people coming back from the military, because they want you to transition, you know, and start your own business. And a lot of those military cats, you know, it's almost like you're getting out of prison. I know it sounds bad to say it like that, but when
but for a civilian who is coming from nothing that wants to make a better life for himself, we got nothing for you.
No, seriously, unless you have to be one of the, and like I said, this has been over 10 years that they keep saying the same thing. When you go to these SBAs, they tell you, hey, women, because they want women to start businesses, they want women CEOs, want women ownership, and military. And like I said, the thing about that military thing is that talk to one of your homeboys from the military, because they promise you all this training. Well, one of the homeboys broke it down to me. He said, hey, man, I was a helicopter gunner. I can't use that in my civilian life. And you come back from after shooting people, you haven't been demilitarized, as they put it, and you can't get a job. It's just like getting out of prison. Everything's a culture shock. You know, people got cell phones and, you know, shit like it fucks you up. But like you said, just a normal citizen who's trying to take advantage of these different organizations and different companies, literally, they will tell you to your face, you're not in style. You, as a minority, you're not the one that we're pushing right now. So you think that shit's going to be over with? That's like I said, when I went to them, it's been 10 years ago, and they still say the same thing. Military and females.
Yep. Okay. Let's have the talk.
I think the theme of our broadcast today is everybody gets paid reparations. You have people who were war people that were hurt by war, reparations. You have people who were slavery, reparations. We got people whose land was stolen, reparations. And then you got African Americans, black folks. They don't get shit.
Let's have the talk. Slavery was abolished with the signing of the Emancipation Proclamation in 1863. But it was 2 years before the end of the Civil War marked its true end, followed by decades of segregation, police brutality, redlining, and discrimination. See, that's the whole reason that Juneteenth exists, is because it was a whole 2 years before black people outside of the South found out that shit was over. That means there are people still enslaved after the war had ended.
They didn't bother to tell you.
Now, the crazy part about it is there were black people immediately after the Civil War that weren't allowed to flee by the government. If you ran to the military and you were seeking help, you were held as war. You were held as like you were property. You were held as property of the enemy. Mm-hmm. Now, being somebody that has worked for the federal government, I used to work in the auctions, and they would hold stuff because it was property in a warehouse. So there were camps where they would hold black people right after the Civil War ended before they would let them go. Almost like, well, you can go here, you can go there. A good example of this is in that movie that Will Smith just did called Emancipation. Mm-hmm. Because in that film, he escapes. I mean, a hellish chase by this slaver, right? And he finally makes it to the Union Army, and he's like, okay, I'm ready to go now. He's like, no, you can't go. You're property of the United States government. He's like, what the fuck are you talking about? I'm free. He's like, not yet. And so then he goes to fight. But listen, so during the American Civil War, as General William Tecumseh Sherman issued an order in South Carolina before the Civil War ended, Shelby County recently approved funding of $5 million for a feasibility study to address areas such as affordable housing, health care, and criminal justice system, and career opportunities for wealth. So Sherman saw that in South Carolina, it's like something has to be done with these people. And, they got to be paid something because, they were used up and thrown away. So Sherman was in South Carolina moving through there, and he was like, all right, we got to do something about this. So he was one of the generals that had an idea about reparations. But like I was saying, in Shelby County, they approved funding for $5 million for a feasibility study to address areas such as affordable housing, healthcare, criminal justice system, and career opportunities. And that's all great, but that's not reparations. That's a $5 million for a study. That means we're going to look into it. What that sounds like is something greasy.
That's that benign neglect.
That's benign neglect. We're going to look like we care, but we don't really care.
Yeah, we'll talk about it. And your husband shouldn't beat you, but you still live with him, don't you? Right. Get your ass home. Go on.
Right. A New York slavery reparations bill has also been introduced and would give a reparations commission over 1 year to research the effects and conduct outreach to affected communities before submitting their findings to the legislature. In Mississippi, the co-founder of the Mississippi chapter of American Descendants of Slavery wants to see reparations paid to the majority of black Mississippians who trace their lineage to chattel slavery in the United States during the nearly 250 years when that institution shaped the country's economy, culture, and even the Constitution. In Virginia, an Episcopalian seminary that employed enslaved workers on its campus before the Civil War unveiled a $1.7 million reparations package last fall. In New Jersey, the Presbyterian Princeton Theological Seminary announced $27.6 million endowment to fund scholarships for descendants of slavery, enhance awareness of the school's historical links to enslavement, and support underserved communities in the area. And support underserved communities in that area.
Something else that well, when I was in college, I was studying the Cherokee. And one of the things people don't realize is that the Cherokee literally gave up their tribehood. So the Cherokee went to court to become white men. Now, the reason this is important, because this was pre-Civil War. The 5 civilized tribes had this one thing in common. They used modern agricultural practices. One of the things this modern agricultural practice was to have slaves to do your work. That's another conversation. You know, we know for a fact that there were Indian tribes that owned slaves, but for what? They didn't have any land, but that's another conversation. So the reason that's important, because after the Civil War, they passed some kind of agreement that no white man will be punished for having slaves. In fact, most of those white people were paid restitution. Was it $32 per slave or something like that? But the Native American that owned slaves, his land was confiscated. That's how they confiscated the Cherokee and Choctaw land, is because they owned slaves or something like that. And they used it as an excuse to take their land as punishment for having slaves, and sent they black, brown asses, red asses to Oklahoma during the Trail of Tears. Yeah, that's some crazy shit. Everybody who has owned slaves, or everybody who was a slave except for black folks and Native Americans, got their money. Now, some Native Americans got their money, like you said, from the casinos. That's more modern. But, you know, we talked about head rights on the last broadcast. Head rights are your land rights if you're a Native American. Like I said, the Louisiana Purchase was owned by maybe 1 or 2 tribes, and those tribes had head rights. And those are the ones, like you said, they sent their black asses or they red asses to Oklahoma. They come to find out they were on top of an oil mine. You know, so yeah, you try to break them and you end up giving them billions of dollars.
Right. So last September, on September the 23rd of last year, 2022, CNN host Don Lemon had a guest on the show, and he asked whether the UK monarchy should pay reparations for slavery. Now, that's a very interesting conversation. Mm-hmm. And it's one people actually don't really consider, because these companies, there were a lot of companies that were out of the UK, corporations that were given charters by the Crown, British Crown, to work as slave traders. And when you think about all of the colonies throughout the Caribbean, in Africa, in the United States, that had enslaved Africans, well, that's because they were given that right by the Crown.
Yeah, somebody gave them permission.
Yeah. So that means if everybody's paying reparations, then give up some of that gold you got over there, Charlie. Come up off some of that gold, Charlie. King Charles.
Well, we should be giving at least, $50,000 every black person in America. But the problem is, some people say that if you're Native American, you were already given reparations. You just didn't know about it. You didn't go get it. Yeah, yeah, I know. that's ironic.
Why can't I have both?
Yeah, or they say that, okay, the big argument in the 70s and 80s was when Nixon started the whole welfare system. They said that was reparations. Yeah, that's the thing. This conversation for reparations is not a new conversation. It's just the fact that you have more people.
So I told you that story about when I went to my bank one day and I was talking with the black female tellers that worked there. Mm-hmm. And they were telling me how all these Becky white, blonde, blue-eyed white people come in with these Native American checks. And I'm like, are you serious? She's like, yes. She's like, white people. And listen, y'all, this is like in the richest part of town in Atlanta. Okay. And she's like, they coming through rolling in like the finest cars. They got the sparkliest diamonds and the nicest watches on their appendages. Okay. So,
It's real.
yeah.
That's that $5 Indian shit. Now, here's another thing that gets complicated. The Dutch were already over here before the English got here. So the Dutch got over here and they already took some Native American wives. So you got some tribes that are really white, that are super like Winnebagos. They look white. Now, if you look at one, you can tell by the size of his head, some other stuff, that he ain't no normal white person if you look at him long enough. But you got some super light tribes. But that's because people were the First Nation tribe up there in Canada that's close to New
I know you're
York.
talking about. I know you're talking about. Yeah.
Yeah, they talk about the white men coming from the west on ships and taking the Earth's bones. They were mining copper. So when them cats was up there mining copper, they were taking brides. So yeah, so you'll have some lighter tribes, but some of these other ones, those $5 Indians, those are during the Dawes Rolls. The Dawes Rolls were those guys, those brothers that went through and just basically categorized you as either you were a freeman or you were actual Native American. But then you had the white folks paying $5. That's why they're called $5 Indians. They would pay them $5 to get on the Dawes Rolls, and then that's how they got, because they was always giving them benefits. So, like I said, the real Native Americans usually got fucked over, but these white folks understood the game, and they paid that $5, and they got on that Dawes Rolls, and now their families have been on there for over 100 years. So, yeah, that's some ironic-ish. You know what I'm saying? So, but yeah, that's a serious thing. These guys got on that just to get these checks, and their family will get checks for the rest of their lives. I don't even know. You don't even know where to start. But everybody's getting paid reparations. Everybody's being taken care of.
Everybody except for black people are getting money.
We are so important to the economy. But it's important to keep you broke because you are a spender.
Okay.
If you're broke,
check it out. So let's look at the corporate history of America and how many of them had enslaved Africans. Well, if you look at all the corporations that began on the East Coast who've been here longer, they all had enslaved Africans. Now, all those corporations benefited from human trafficking and slave labor. Now,
hold up. Something else that you don't forget, the ones down south got penalized for having slaves. They got a little bit of money, but it was different. But the ones up north, they didn't get penalized for having slaves. And like you said, what was it, AIM? One of those insurance companies, they were paying for the slaves. So when slavery was over, the government gave them some money too. Like, hey, we're hurting your business. Everybody got, yeah. when you read these articles, it will blow your mind because you're like, okay, so everybody got paid, and they got paid shitloads of money, not no little bit of money. They got paid a lot of money.
So that's the crazy part. They were given reparations for the slaves that were taken away.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, hold up. What does the slave get? What do the descendants of the slave get? See, a lot of this comes down to these inept government agencies that are staffed with these greedy bureaucrat people that practice deep nepotism. And the reason why I say deep nepotism, because it's a good old boy system. Now,
definitely.
People are like, oh, it's the U.S. government. It's not a good old boy system. Your ass ain't never worked for the government, so you have no idea what I'm talking about.
It's not just the nepotism. It's the fact that if they know if they give black folks money, then all of a sudden you're not a minority anymore. Who's going to do this work? And that's what we have going on right now. One of the punishments people don't get from the civil rights movement in the 60s and 70s is that they started letting all these immigrants in. And so black folks started going to college, but all these immigrants are coming over here doing those menial jobs, whether it's cleaning, plumbing, carpentry, stuff like that, stuff that we thought was beneath us. And then next thing you know, we realized that college is a hustle. You spend all that damn money on college and you ain't guaranteed nothing. But then you have these minorities coming over here starting some real businesses, passing them down, mechanic work, stuff like that. So we migrated away from that thinking that we were too good, but really was a punishment. That's when they opened our borders. Before the 70s, the borders were locked tight. But after the civil rights movement, they let them borders open, and that hurt us. That hurt the black folks. That hurt a whole sector of us.
Mm. This discussion rubs some people the wrong way. And I really don't give a shit about how those people feel. But I can tell you why those people feel the way they do. They are the people. They are the people. They are the same people that complain about Cheryl Lee Ralph singing "Lift Every Voice and Sing" at the Super Bowl. It's those people. It's those people that always want to say all lives matter when a black person says Black Lives Matter. Same person. It's the same person that has that "Back the Blue" bumper sticker on their car. Anytime you hold on a second. Anytime you see that fucking bumper sticker, that motherfucker in the driving that car is a piece of shit. And I'm gonna tell you why. Because and that's a loaded statement. I don't give a fuck. I don't give a Frenchman's fuck. Okay? That person is turning a blind eye to injustice and murder. And they're justifying everything that's being done to a group of people by a smaller group of people because the ones committing the crime have the power.
Tradition.
Yes. That person is basically Renfield to Dracula. Okay? That's who that person is.
Mm-hmm.
So
I'm procuring the
yes.
people.
Also, these people are the same ones with all this incel energy. And if you don't know what incel means, it means involuntarily celibate. It means don't nobody want to fuck you. Okay? That means you're not getting laid. All right? And this incel energy is this nerdy, sexually frustrated dude most of the time that lives at home, hasn't accomplished anything, lives at home with his parents. He hasn't accomplished anything. Okay? They hate their life. And so when they see people who have been oppressed, they're like, don't complain. Just put your head down and just, just bear it. No, man, no. That's how you got to where you are. That's how you stayed where you are in your life and didn't go anywhere. Is because you just accepted everything as it is and you didn't rage against the machine. So people who do speak out for reparations are indeed raging against the machine because we built the fucking machine.
The issue is if they give us real reparation money, like $100,000, you won't be broke anymore. You will no longer be a consumer. There's a chance that black folks start investing. And if we start investing, then all of a sudden you have the Tulsa, Oklahomas, and you have the South and North Carolinas. I forgot the cities over there. You have that. When we did an episode on black towns and black cities, then you find out there's black towns and black cities from the 1800s that have been black for years in the Midwest and the Southwest, Southeast and Southwest. That you think, okay, they're racist there. You have plenty of towns in Louisiana and Oklahoma. Oklahoma was supposed to be a black state. That's why Tulsa existed as it did. So when you see that, whenever we were given what we were owed or we were left alone, we prospered. But right now, they never leave us alone. You have places like Chicago where you have all these liberal stuff and black folks can't get it together. That's because you got cops who are dirty. You got politicians who make more money on you being crazy. You got the Al Sharptons. You got the Jesse Jacksons. Al's from New York, Jesse's from Chicago. It's funny that those two places are the worst for black folks.
Yeah, but you just mentioned two serial opportunists, though.
Two boule niggas.
Yes, these boule motherfuckers that are serial opportunists, habitual line steppers, grease balls, okay, snakes, reptilian booty scratchers.
Do not want you to succeed.
These people actually support the oppression system because it allows them a source of income and a way of life, a comfortable way of life. But you got to understand that whenever you start talking about reparations and this pushback, people are so, they get so mad. They get so angry because That's when you can really see who a person is. I'm gonna tell you something, man. You can talk to people about the space program and the secret space program and who shot JFK and 9/11 and all this other shit.
All those conspiracy
All those
theories.
conspiracy theories. You can talk about all that shit. And then you talk about the conspiracy against black people. And then you really see who the fuck they are. It's like, now I see you.
Yeah.
Now I see your true colors
I'm like,
shining
oh,
through.
pull yourself up by your bootstraps. I'm like,
I ain't
wait
got
a
no
minute.
boots.
Well, hold it. I I had boots before you did. See, what people
No,
never
you
want to
took
talk
my
about.
boots, put them on, and started walking around like they're yours.
See, okay, see, this is one of that 1619 project, whatever. The reason I have a problem with that is not for the reason you think, because something that people don't know. The first slave owners in this country were what? Black. Some of the first slaves in this country, they had black slaves, but they also had white slaves. A lot of the Irish, a lot of the so people forget that they don't want you to know that history because then you might go back to it. You might decide, you know what? I need me a couple white folks to come work for me. You know what I'm saying? They don't want you to be inspired to be who you really are. So they lie about the history. They bury it deep. Look, whenever they talk about people coming over that landmass, that Bering Strait, they always keep pushing it back. Remember, first it was 10,000 years ago. Then they were like, wait a minute, there were black folks already. No, it was 12,000 years ago, which was the time of that younger Dryas. You come to find out, 11,000,
But see,
12,000,
the
14,000
reason why
years.
I don't have a problem with the 1619 project is because it gets the conversation going
Started.
about reparations.
Yeah. I don't. When I say I have a problem, my problem is it teaches you that you came from somewhere else when many of us were already here. Many of us had our land taken over here. That's all. That's
But
my
check this
only
out.
issue with it.
I think people have grown up used to a small sampling of what black excellence is.
Oh my God. Yeah,
Because when you grow up in a place where there's black banks and there's black businesses all around you and not just like a small part of town, then you walk differently, you talk differently, you think differently, you have a different sense of identity. Dude,
when,
in
I'm
these
sorry.
Asian parts of town, you go down the street, everything is Asian. The Asian there's like 12 Asian banks in that part of town. And there's
Well,
all Asian businesses surrounding those banks. You got Korean Christian churches, Buddhist temples, Shinto temples.
see, okay. What people don't understand is that when you know, you don't act that way. See, when you're black, there's only like three or four black people that are successful. The sellout, then you got the athlete, then you got the musician, the entertainer, or
Dude,
comedian, or the actor.
in high school, I had to go to black bookstores to get
Yeah,
the real history about where I come from.
black books. But like I said, the reason that's so important is because as a black person, that you think that you could, if you only know about the basketball players and the entertainers, you gonna think how many people. Everybody wants to be a Jordan. Everybody wants to be LeBron. That's the argument now. But the thing is, nobody wants to be Bill Russell. Nobody wants to be Kareem. Do you know why? Because them niggas they fought white folks. Bill Russell had a fight. You know, when you look at that meeting with Bill Russell, Muhammad Ali, Jim Brown, and all them super black celebrities, and they sat down like, "Hey, we gonna do some shit." Like they don't want that. Like the shit with Kyrie. How come nobody stood with Kyrie? Nah, you know, somebody should have stood with that nigga because that was fucked up. But the point I'm making is that when you don't know what greatness looks like, you aspire to the wrong shit. If in the black community, you got gangsters, so you aspire to be a gang member or a drug dealer because you think that that's the only person you know with money. That's because you weren't raised in a society where excellence and success of all your people. See, we grew up in a black middle class where we know people that were lawyers, that are lawyers, excuse me. We know people that are surgeons and they're studying cancer. We know people like that. So we never ever what's the word? We never aspired for less than what we were. And if you did something illegal, we respected you for it. You just expect to go to jail. We ain't gonna stop you. But like I said, they love to put those movies out with the gang member movies and shit like that. And so that's what you aspire to be. You want to be an athlete. But the fact is this: When you looked at the Tulsa, Oklahoma, when you looked at how much money was out there, when you looked at the situation, like you said before, one of the richest persons, black people in America, moved to Chicago because of her oil rights in Oklahoma.
Because of
We're
her
not
oil
told that
rights in
story.
Oklahoma?
Yeah, you're not told that story because if you told that story, it might be different. Madam C.J. Walker, they did do a movie about her, and you realize like, oh, she wasn't just some straightening comb. She made hair care products. She knew her people. And so those successful business people, back in the day, we talked about them a lot more. But now we're talking about Jay-Z. 50 Cent said some deep shit about Jay-Z, how he be playing people. Like when Jay's not relevant, he jumps on all these features. But all of a sudden he's relevant. The same people who he stepped on, you don't let them on his shit. You know, it shows you that that's that crabs in a bucket, whatever you want to call it, when somebody's on top, they're not helping nobody, or they're half-ass helping you. They do that shit that sounds good, but ain't really benefiting nobody. That's the biggest issue. This goes back to also when we talked about Asians on one of the other podcasts. You were like, when they boycott some shit, they don't need no newsletter. When the Chinese stopped buying product because product did something to offend them, product quickly recognized that shit went down 5 and 10% and started kissing Chinese ass and sucking Chinese dick. But black folks, Gucci and Prada, offend us. They just keep offending us because we keep buying. I got me a Gucci belt. Now you live with your mama in an apartment, but you got a Gucci belt. So it shows our priorities are messed up. But it also understand that what made us so strong in the civil rights movement were the boycotts. When we boycotted those bus companies, they started kissing our ass after a while because we started walking. We carpool. We walked to work, all to support the movement. We got a lot of products shut down. We got a lot of shit done because of that.
What MLK did that pissed off a lot of people is when the garbage men were on strike in Memphis.
Yes.
And he supported them. And that pissed a lot of people off because he was really ruffling a lot of feathers, messing with money. And they didn't see him as this quiet, passive civil rights leader anymore. He's this guy that actually stirs some shit up. And I'm like, oh, well, this guy can be a problem. We're going to have to eliminate him.
Yeah, he changed.
Well, yeah, he did change, but his eyes were open because it was around that same time that he said, I think to Jesse Jackson, he said, I may have integrated my people into a burning house.
Yep. Look, what we're saying is that everybody's has had help except us. And then when you give us food stamps and you give us welfare, that's not helping us because you put us in the hole. You put us in a deeper hole, and then you give us little trinkets.
That's pimping. That is pimping. That's bottom bitch pimping.
Yeah, and so we do these. That's the whole part right now. Before we were doing the jobs nobody else wanted. Now we're not doing any job. We all want to be reality stars and make money off doing TikToks and dancing. This is shucking and jiving on a epic level. Before you had 2 or 3 niggas shucking and jiving and dancing and not having no substance. Now you got a whole generation of niggas shucking and jiving, don't know what they doing. Just dancing for the TikTok, clanking, making up shit, all that. You don't even realize how offensive that is. And then remember when black folks got off TikTok, white folks, well what are we going to do? We can't dance.
Dude,
we don't make a dance.
There's this commercial that's on TV right now, and it's this black dude. He's dressed like he's about to go to like a boardroom meeting. He's in a suit and tie. And he gets off the elevator. As soon as the elevator opens, this song comes on. This young white girl singing, I just met you. This is crazy, but here's my number. Call me maybe. And he's dancing like some 13-year-old white girl. And this dude, he got to be about 260. Bald head black dude, dark skinned guy, about 260, dancing like some 13-year-old white girl. And I'm like, bruh, like, how much? How much does your soul cost? Because listen, I know he probably made about $300,000 for that national campaign as an actor, bruh. Like, really though? My girl saw it. She was like, "That's a damn shame." She just nodded her head like, You know what I mean? Like, because as soon as you said that, that's what the first thing I thought of, and I'm like, wow.
Look, I remember being a kid and somebody would do like a commercial for like KFC, and we would talk about that nigga. You know what I'm saying? Like, hold it. I remember when Magic was the first one people didn't really talk about. I remember when he did a commercial for Hot Wings, and I remember them motherfuckers were delicious when they first came out. Nobody talked about. But I think when Hammer did a commercial for KFC, they was like, Hammer, you got enough money? You should be doing. It's like they dissed that nigga hard. Like, this just see,
yes, that's also a time of like conscious hip hop was super strong.
We were coming back into
Oh man, so like somebody dancing for chicken, dog. No, don't do that.
Man, God damn, you might as well be eating watermelon right now, motherfucker.
But I mean, I like both though. I like chicken and watermelon. But I'm not gonna dance for that shit.
I think what it is the fact that when somebody makes light of it, and we've been victims of stereotypes so much, so you try not to be. That was one of the deepest things about the Dave Chappelle. Remember when he had left and Donnell Rawlings and Charlie Murphy had hosted a show or two, and this white guy was saying, he said, you make fun of Jews for being cheap, so I make sure I leave a big tip now. It flipped the narrative. When somebody's being made fun of, people hate being made fun of. I get it. But in the black folks, that's how we address our issues. When somebody makes fun of you, it brings it to your knowledge. Instead of being upset, you realize, okay, do I want to change this or this is who I am? I remember being a little kid, and my Sunday school teacher was like, hey, stop switching when you walk. I'm like, I'm 8 years old. What the fuck is switching mean? I was walking like a girl. But if it wasn't for him making fun of me, I'd change my walk. But that's what we do. And now if you make fun of somebody, you got to worry about them committing suicide. But the truth of the matter is, that's how you learn about anxiety and learn to deal with it. And if somebody says too much, you beat their ass. But if somebody brings something to your attention, you address it because it's hard. And now all of a sudden you're addressing these issues. If we make fun of you for, hey man, don't do that commercial, you're still a millionaire. but it makes you more selective. Like, you know what? I don't want to do commercial for being gay.
And guess what? That motherfucker probably is against reparations.
Look. Hey, remember what you said? McNulty for prep. I ain't doing no prep. I don't give a fuck. If I'm a starving actor, see, I didn't know what that shit was about. I felt so stupid. Like, what do you mean you don't understand? I'm like, what do you mean? It's oh my god. So yeah, I'm not doing these gay herpes commercials. If you're a black actor. Fuck it. This goes back to the motherfucking Hollywood Shuffle. Like literally.
Black acting school.
Yeah, that, you gotta watch that shit so you understand how deep this shit is. That you got a white motherfucker telling you that you're not black enough, and then because you want that role, you're like, okay, I ain't got no weapon. I'm shucking and jiving. No. Hey, nigga, I got basically.
But see, this has me thinking about what I said earlier about how Takeshi was talking about the Japanese internment camps and the difference between the Nisei, older generation, and the Sansei, younger generation, and how there was inner fighting between the groups and this generational difference in seeing how, look, they owe us something, whereas the prideful older generation was like, we just endure this shit and deal with it. You have that same mentality with black people. But
the issue is white folks get paid for it. It's necessary.
Well, hang on, but I mean, you can talk to black people nowadays, and someone would tell you, like, I don't want reparations. And I'm like, why? It's because I can earn it myself. And I'm like, that's you being prideful. This isn't about your pride. This is something that was taken away from your ancestors and should be given to you because you're alive to do it. Now, if you don't want it, that's fine. Give it to a family member, but or donate, take the money and donate it to a black cause. But
hold on, Roscoe. That's the whole problem. Okay, I can get it. There are black folks that are successful, and so they feel like I did it on my own. I remember the one thing that pissed me off was back when Clarence Thomas, who I understand better now, but he was like, he never benefited from affirmative action. That was bullshit. The fact that you remember he was some big wig someplace, all that was affirmative action was necessary because the good old boy network was so entrenched in this society you couldn't get in, and they made up things about you. Oh, black folks aren't smart enough. They used those stereotypes against us, and then so you had to have been.
But listen, but then you have the Negro that's like, I want to struggle hard and fight against the system. Hey, you don't have to, man. You don't have to be prideful. There is now laws. There are now laws that give you a level playing field to operate on.
Look, if we do
But
this shit
it
together,
took
we're more
pushing
effective.
to get that.
Yeah.
Now,
Well,
but here's another thing. I understand there's people who don't reparation. They don't want reparations because it will eliminate a certain type of Negro. It will eliminate a Negro that is very dependent on the system. Now,
boy, it was exacerbated.
now check this out. So of course there's people who are shitty with money and they'll blow that $50,000 or however much they're going to give us quickly. But then there are those that will take that money and invest it. Right? They'll buy some real estate.
Change futures.
They'll
That will
buy,
change.
they'll buy gold, they'll buy silver. They'll buy things that will make money for them long term and become generational wealth. And then
Here's the
what you
issue.
have are people who are like black farmers, which is another story altogether, who then have generational wealth. But you got to be careful with that generational wealth because you don't want your forebears fighting over that land. You don't want your descendants fighting over the land. So then
No, that's not it.
you got to give each of them something equally so they have their own piece.
We were offered 40 acres and a mule. That's all. I'm asking for what we were promised. We're not, see, that's the whole thing. Y'all think we asking for something extra. No, I'm asking for what you promised. You said 40 acres and a mule. That was enough for you to live off of and be independent and start your life. That's the whole thing, is that everything that was promised to us. See, we're told about the Indians who did treaties and the treaties were shit on. But ain't nobody talking about the black folks who offered treaties, who were offered stuff and got shit on. Like I said, Lincoln put that 40 acres and a mule in there for a reason, because they were trying to fix things. So just give me my 40 acres and a mule. We got enough land to do it.
Right.
Give it to me.
Yeah.
And that's the whole thing, is that they literally, that reparations is such a bad thing. It's not. Now, Dave Chappelle did a skit about reparations, and remember they said, "Oh, Sprint stocks went up," so because it's showing that we're behind on our bills. It was a joke, ha ha ha. But he's also making a point that we need to be thinking about it. If we did get that money, what would we do with it? We would start joint investing companies. We would put all our money into a trust and create lifetime wealth. But by doing that, you eliminate that lower class people that clean your toilets. You get rid of this rampant consumers that always buy cars and have to make payments for 10, 20 years, and the car dies, and you trade that piece of shit in for another one. See,
check cashing places might even go out of business because everybody can afford to have a bank account now.
That's what people ain't looking at. See, I didn't understand this before I started selling cars. That is a trap. You buy a new car, you got a $300 payment, you got $200 for insurance, so you're paying $500 a month. But the car dies before the life of the loan. So what you got to do? You trade it in for another bill. You trade it in for another. Perpetual slavery.
What you just said right there is powerful. A lot of people do not get that trap. They don't understand that mechanism, that financial house of cards that they get caught in the middle of.
Quagmire. Because you just can't get out. And you don't realize, because you got a new car and that makes you feel good. You got to distinguish between feeling good and being good. And I told you, I had that conversation with my daughter. I said, look, baby, would you rather feel safe or be safe? Like, you can go to a party and it's 4 or 5 child molesters, 3 or 4 murderers, motherfucking rapists in that fucking party. But since you're grooving and dancing, you feel good. Or would you rather be at home being bored where daddy's here to protect you? And ain't nobody coming through that door. And if they do, they're not leaving upright. Because that's the difference between feeling good and being good. You should want to be safe, not feel safe. But that's that Oprah message. They just, well, don't you feel like, cut that zero and get with this hero. It's all about feelings. Feelings don't exist. It's the same thing with belief. Belief is the enemy to truth in studying. That's because you want to, well, I believe this, because that's not the truth. That's about a feeling. That's somehow, that people think that means something. But that's how they get black folks, who we're all about our feelings. And they're like, hey, man, don't you feel better? Don't you, hey, doesn't this feel better? We rub this grease on your ass before we fuck you? Because we were fucking you raw before. That's what you're dealing with. You're dealing with it's all about feelings, but they're not changing the situation or improving it. It's that benign neglect. It's the Democratic Party
it's
talking
the
about
side piece relationship that America has with black people.
Yes. And until you understand that me being quiet only makes it easier for you to fuck your wife, that's a problem.
Yep. So we've laid out from the beginning of this episode all the people in
They
America
got reparations, but us.
that got reparations except black people. And that is what you see time and time again. Everybody getting their piece of the pie except for black people. And they'll do is they'll give black people just a little bit to make you feel satisfied, to make you feel like you're part of it. You know, they'll give you a black president, they'll give you a black mayor, they give you a black city councilman. They give you all this bullshit that you feel you elected. No, they let that happen. They allowed it to happen because they let it happen at such a slow pace that it feels like a true struggle to you when that is actually a virtual reality program they're running. So the fix is in for sure, but we have to push for reparations. We have to keep this
Real change.
reparations dialogue going until it actually happens. Now, whether it's $2,000 or $20,000, you got to give us something, man. You owe us. Look, that's all I got. We out. Peace.
Holla back.